Welcome to Finding Holiness, where we delve into timeless Torah wisdom, revealing the sacred in everyday moments. Join us on a journey to elevate your spirituality and discover holiness in every aspect of life. I'm your host, Rabbi David Kadosh, and together, let's embark on a path of spiritual exploration. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Erev Tov, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Thursday night Parashat HaShavua class here live from Thornhill, Ontario, Canada. Wherever you are listening in the world, this is where we are. This is where we get together at least once a week to enjoy some really, really yummy food, and we get to learn Torah at the same time. And it's great to have people here in person listening, and as well you online. Hello to you. Thank you for joining tonight live, and for those listeners listening on the podcast and the recording at findingholiness.com, thank you very much for all your support. Chodesh Tov, happy month. It is Rosh Chodesh Kislev tonight. Baruch Hashem, tonight's shiur has been graciously sponsored by Mr. Shimon Azulai in memory of his father, Mr. Pinchas Azulai Zichrono Livracha, as well as Mr. and Mrs. David Magazinich in memory of his grandfather Yosef Zri and Ben Habib Zichrono Livracha, and as well by Mr. Morris Ben Chaim in memory of his mother Rachel Ben Chaim Zichrona Livracha. May the words of Torah that we say this evening be leilu nishmatam ti nafsham tzrura b'tzora hayim. Amen. What can we say about Parashat Toledot? The blessings of all blessings. Was it to the right person or not? Yeah, Yaakov and Esav, the moment of truth, to get those very, very holy blessings. Ve'iten lecha Elokim mital hashamayim mishmanei haaretz. Those words that penetrate the heart and soul of every Jew. Many Jews have the custom to recite this every Motzei Shabbat after Havdalah, these Pesukim, corresponding to the ultimate beracha, so that it should be a week of blessing. But what I want to focus on today is what happens right before that. Right before that blessing, we are introduced to the birth of Yaakov and Esav. After 20 years of being barren, Rivka gives birth to a pair of twins, Yaakov and Esav, two extreme opposite of brothers. One of them is Ishtam Yoshev Alim, Yaakov being a man of tents, a man of study, a man of truth, a man of completion. And you have Esav, who is, what can I say, a hairy guy who loves the field and loves Olam Hazeh. And for whatever reasons that we're going to talk about today, we notice in the parasha how Yitzhak Avinu loves his son Esav. Vaye'ehav Yitzhak et Esav. He loves Esav, his son, kitzaid befiv. For trapping was in his mouth. This is what the Torah tells us. And Rashi explains, what does that mean, kitzaid befiv, that there was trapping in his mouth? So Rashi says he knew how to deceive his father. He had the ability to ensnare him and trick him. And he would ask him questions on halacha that if you didn't know any better, you would think, wow, this guy really knows his beans. Esav would ask him questions such as, Abba, how do you take ma'aser from salt? How do you take ma'aser from straw? Now, you're not supposed to take ma'aser from salt and straw, but these are the questions that Esav was asking Yitzhak. How do you tithe these items? And his father was under the impression that he was very meticulous regarding the mitzvot. Any person that asks questions like this, wow, it's unbelievable. So, there's a lot of questions going on over here. Number one, why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who orchestrated everything, of course, why did he arrange for Yitzhak to love Esav due to these deceptive questions? What was happening behind the scenes of these questions? We have a pasuk we say every Friday night in Lechu Nira Nena, Ohave Adonai Sinura, Shomer Nafshot Chasidav Miyad Reshaim Yatzilem. That the lovers of God despise the evil. God protects the lives of those devout ones, of this Chasidav, and he rescues them from the hands of evil. And so if that's the case, it would seem that it would have been better had Yitzchak recognized the evil of Esav. He was an evil man. murderer, Oved Avodah Zarah. Like, what's going on over here? We also have to try to explore what really perplexes all the Mefarshim is, why did Yitzchak originally want to give the blessings to Esav? Okay, you love your son, but why give him the blessings? Especially when it became evident and he realized that Yaakov, took the blessings from Esav. What does Yitzchak say? He endorses the act. Gam baruch yeh. Says so too, okay, he will be blessed, meaning the blessing will stand by Yaakov. So, okay, you love your son for some reason, kitzayid befiv, we got to figure that out, which is very strange because he's a rasha. And second, you want to give him the blessings? Give Yaakov the blessings, especially that you know that it's Gam Baruch Yeh, and you accepted it and you approved of it later on. So to begin answering all these questions, we're going to go a lot of different places today. So I need you to follow with me, but it's really unbelievable some of the chidushim that we're going to say. The first chidush we're going to say is the name of the Arizal. And the Arizal addresses the statement of Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav kitzayid befiv, that Yitzchak loved Esav because trapping was in his mouth. And he also asked the question, how could Yitzchak be so mistaken? How do you make a mistake like this? He loved Esav and failed to recognize that he was wicked. So look what Arizal says. He says that the holy neshamot of the Jewish leaders in history were trapped in Esav's mouth. Hence the title called Esav's mouth. That was the title of tonight's class. And who were these leaders? Namely, Shemaya and Avtalion, Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Akiva. These were the big chachamim, the Tanaim that were trapped in the mouth of Esav. What do all of these have in common? What do all these Tanaim have in common? They were all converts descending from Esav HaRasha. In addition, he adds something else. And he says, he quotes a Targum Yonatan, who explains that when Esav wanted to prevent the Shevatim later on, when he wanted to prevent the Shevatim from burying Yaakov in Me'arat HaMachpelah, Hushim, who was the son of Dan, intervened. And he grabbed a sword and decapitated Esav. And Esav's head rolled into Me'arat HaMachpelah and came to rest, the Targum Yonatan says, on the lap of Yitzchak. Or meaning right next to where Yitzchak was buried, in Me'arat HaMachpelah. So, Esav's children buried his body in the field of Machpelah, but the head was in the cave. So we have to figure out what merited that the head enter the cave and not the rest of the body. But, based on what we just quoted from the Arizal, that Esav's head contained the holy neshamot of these leaders of Bnei Israel, prominent scholars, famous Tanaim, the offspring of Gerim, and therefore it was orchestrated from Shamayim that Esav's head be detached from his impure, unholy body, and the head which is concealing all these holy neshamot, this treasure, be buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah alongside Yitzchak, the source of Kedusha. This is what the Arizal says. Wow. Okay, if I were to stop the shul right here, all right, go home and think about that one and come back and speak about it. That already is a very, very huge novelty by the Arizal. But we're going to see a lot of great things today. Says the Ma'or Enaim, another great commentary on the parasha, and he presents the Arizal with an additional clarification. And he writes the following. Sheitzchak ahav et Esav kitzayid befiv, ki nishmat Rabbi Akiva hayeta medaberet mipiv. He says that when Esav spoke, Yitzchak was able to perceive specifically the voice of Rabbi Akiva, ki hayta kelula bo bibchinat rosh shel Esav, seeing as his neshama was held captive inside Esav's head. So later on, he actually goes on to say that Yitzchak heard all these voices. He heard Shemaya, Avtalion, Rabbi Meir, and Rabbi Akiva. But it was the voice of Rabbi Akiva that stood out. He especially heard that voice. So now, what does this mean? how are we supposed to understand that he specifically heard Rabbi Akiva's voice? So he explains Rashi's comment that we spoke about at the start of the class. What does it mean kitzayid befiv? When Esav would ask him these eloquent questions of how do you tithe salt and straw, and his father was under the impression that he was meticulous with regards to performing the mitzvot. It's unclear why Yitzchak was so impressed with these questions specifically. Salt and straw. There are a lot of questions that you could ask to make you sound smart. There's a lot of people that I see every single day that act very, very intelligently, but they're really, okay. They're, maybe not on the higher scale of, academics and okay. But a lot of things is that what specifically with salt and straw caught his attention. This is an unbelievable chidush by the Maor Einayim. He says the Gemara in Masechet Nedarim Daf Nun Amud Aleph. After Rabbi Akiva married his wife Rachel, at the time he was just Akiva. Rachel was the daughter of a very wealthy man named Kalba Savua. A lot of people here know the story. The father disowned her, and Akiva banished them from his home because, I'm providing you with all the money and you're going to marry this shepherd, this guy, he's going to go learn now, he's 40 years old, like, what are you doing? You're wasting my time? What kind of life are you going to live over here? So he banished both of them from the home. Penniless, they were now forced to sleep. The Gemara says, where the straw was stored, and no pillow or blanket to cover them. Chachamim explained that Eliyahu Navi came dressed as a poor man and called out to them from the entrance and said, please give me some straw, because my wife just gave birth and I need to lay her down on something. We don't have a bed. We're poor, we don't have a bed. I need to lay her down on something. So Rabbi Akiva at that point looked at his wife, who I guess at the time was missing home a little bit, and said to his wife, you see, this man also doesn't have straw. He also needs straw. We have straw. We can provide for him. So Mefarshim explained that Eliyahu Navi came to Rabbi Akiva and his wife at that time to show them that there were poor people in the world worse off than both of them. That was the reason why they're there. Now, even though the Gemara doesn't actually explicitly say that Rabbi Akiva gave Eliyahu Navi the straw, it's clear that he gave the poor man the straw for him and his wife to sleep on. It's obvious that he would, based on the way the conversation was going. So, says the Maor Einayim, what transpired when Esav inquired from Yitzchak how to tie straw, Esav clearly intended to deceive his father. That was his point. No, he's not stupid. I'm going to try to deceive my father. I'm going to show him, I'm a big tzaddik when really he's a faker. He wanted to give him the impression that he was meticulous with the mitzvot. But with Ruach HaKodesh, Yitzchak, like we said, Kitzayid Befiv, according to Arizal, Yitzchak heard the voice of Rabbi Akiva coming out of the mouth of Esav, alluding to the straw that he was destined to give to Eliyahu Navi despite extreme poverty. And therefore, Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav, Yitzchak loved Esav, thinking that he too performed the mitzvot diligently. Just like Rabbi Akiva in his state of poverty was able to give the straw when he barely had straw to Eliyahu Navi because his wife gave birth. So he heard that he heard the voice of Rabbi Akiva from the mouth. From Esav's mouth, when he asked him about the straw, he said, wow, you have Yitzchak et Esav. He realized maybe my son also performs a mitzvot like this too. So unbelievable. This now makes a lot of sense based on what the Arizal is saying, right? That Esav's head rolled into Me'arat HaMachpelah and the merit of the holy neshamot that were inside of it. Yitzchak heard the voices of the holy Tanaim, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Akiva, coming from Esav's mouth. His head contained some degree of kedusha. There was some element of holiness over there and deserved to be buried in Me'arat HaMachpelah, separate from his contaminated body. That answers the question about straw. We're still left with salt. Those are two questions that he asked according to Rashi. So is there any resemblance or any connection of straw with Rabbi Akiva in the Talmud? There actually is. There's a Gemara in Masechet Eruvin, Daf Mem Aleph Amud Aleph, that discusses the laws regarding Tisha B'Av that falls on a Friday. Nowadays, Tisha B'Av does not fall on a Friday. But before the set calendar was made, it was possible that Tisha B'Av can fall on a Friday. And the question is, if Tisha B'Av falls on a Friday, do we extend the fast until the end of the day, meaning go right into Shabbat, okay? Or must I stop my fast before Shabbat begins, eat something small, in order that I don't begin Shabbat in a state of pain and suffering? Like, I don't want to start Shabbat and I'm hungry. That's not the proper way to start Shabbat. So that's the machloket going on. So this is what the Gemara says. If Tisha B'Av falls out on Friday, we bring him an egg to eat. So that he doesn't enter Shabbat in a state of suffering. Learning a Braita said, Rabbi Yehuda learned, once I was sitting in front of Rabbi Akiva, it was a Friday that Tisha B'Av was on. והביאו לו ביצה מגולגלת והוגמעה בלא מלח. And they gave him a hard-boiled egg, complete. He swallowed it without salt. That's what Rabbi Akiva did. ולא שהיה תאב לה. It's not that he was hungry for it. אלא להראות לתלמידים הלכה. But rather to show the students halacha that you don't complete the fast of Tisha B'Av right until Shabbat, but rather you eat something. And the Braita says that Rabbi Yosef disagrees with Rabbi Akiva and that you have to continue eating in there. Now, what's interesting is that Tosafot on this Gemara says that Rabbi Akiva at that moment was actually dangerously ill. He was very, very sick. And the doctors brought Rabbi Akiva this egg. They were the ones that brought him this egg, this roasted egg, to swallow without salt. Maybe, I guess salt may have been detrimental for him. But he did without salt, and that's the key. And Rabbi Yehuda, Tosfos said, didn't know that he was dangerously ill. He didn't investigate the exact reason why he ate the egg. He just figured, okay, he's eating the egg because to show the people the halacha. So what do we see from this story? That Rabbi Akiva was dangerously ill to the fast, and nevertheless, what's happening here? He made sure to consume the egg without salt to emphasize the suffering that a person should go through over the Churban Beit HaMikdash. And just not to go into Shabbat, that's the reason why we did it. So based on this story, what can we suggest? Esav asked Yitzhak, Abba, how do we tithe salt and straw? Again, Yitzhak perceived the voice of Rabbi Akiva coming from the mouth of Esav, because Rabbi Akiva's neshama was stored inside Esav's head, and Yitzhak perceived that he wanted to learn from him to set aside the salt for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, not to eat the egg with salt, to give the straw to the poor man. All of it was one. The straw for the poor man who needed to give to his wife, to put aside the salt, just so that it's not an extra taste. All of this was all done lishma. And Yitzchak noticed this. He realized this from the mouth of Esav, and he said, wow, what a son I have. This is unbelievable. I got an amazing son, tzaddik over here. Unbelievable. Says Rabbi Pinchas Friedman, why did Yitzchak, who heard Rabbi Akiva's voice, why was that voice the one that was most noticeable of all the ones? Of all the Tanaim that were trapped inside the head. There's a very famous midrash in Esther, Midrash Esther. מתחילת בריאתו של עולם, from the inception of creation, התקין הקדוש ברוך הוא לכל אחד ואחד מה שראוי לו. That God prepared for each and every individual what he would require. Avraham rosh lamulim, Avraham was the foremost, was the chief of the circumcised, because he was the mitzvah, the first to Brit Milah. Yitzchak rosh ne'aikadim, Yitzchak was the foremost of the bound ones, because he was Akedat Yitzchak. And Yaakov rosh temimim, and Yaakov was that of the pure. What's the meaning of this midrash? So based on the famous Ramban of Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the actions of our Avot, our signs, relate to the behavior of that's going to take place with the children, that Yitzchak Avinu paved the way for all Jews in the future to sacrifice their lives to sanctify HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because Yitzchak, as the Midrash said, was Rosh La Ne'aikadim, he was the chief of those who were bound, that gave the strength to Klal Yisrael in the future. Whoever wanted to sanctify themselves for the sake of God, That's where it comes from. When Yitzchak had himself tied on the Mizbeach, from that moment on, it was ingrained in the neshamot. It was ingrained in not only the neshamot, in the nature, in the physical nature of the people to follow that drive to sanctify themselves, forego their lives and spirits, and sanctify HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name. And time again over history, we saw this. We saw this in the Inquisitions. We saw this in the pogroms. We saw it in the Holocaust. Tonight's Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Who more than the Maccabim? Who are the Maccabim? Yehuda Maccabi, Yonatan Maccabi, Shimon Maccabi, Elazar Maccabi. All of them died in battle. Different battles, but they all died fighting these wars against the Greeks who were trying to poison their brains with Greek philosophy to remove all elements of Torah. When there was no Torah, no Shabbat, no Milah, all the basics of our Rosh Chodesh, all the basics of what the Jewish person prides himself on. And they said, we're going to fight. We're going to fight. And they all died, unfortunately. They died in battle. Where did they get this strength from? They got it from Yitzchak. This is what we call, by the way, Torat Chesed. The concept of Torat Chesed, when you pass things down. The Gemara says, it quotes a pasuk in Mishlei, we say in Eshet Chayil, Pi apatcha bechokma, v'torat chesed al-leshona. What's Torah chesed? The Gemara asks, V'chi yesh Torah shel chesed, v'yesh Torah she'ena shel chesed? There's a Torah of kindness and a Torah of not kindness? What do you call a Torah of kindness for? So Gemara gives two answers. Torah lishma, zui Torah shel chesed. A Torah that's for the sake of heaven, that's called Torah shel chesed. And if it's not lishma, it's not Torah shel chesed. That's the first answer. Second answer is Torah lelamda, Torah that you're going to pass on, you're going to teach other people. So Torah shel chesed. And if you're not going to teach it, if you're going to keep it from yourself, then that's not Torah shel chesed. So both opinions actually represent divine truth over here. They're interconnected. To test whether or not a person studies Torah lishma is to see whether or not he teaches it to other people. And as well, also doing it lichvot shamayim, to enhance the glory of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When someone doesn't teach Torah to others and keeps it himself, it's an indication that he's not learning Torah lishma. It's for his own self-glorification. So we can appreciate that Yitzchak Avinu at this moment merited becoming the foremost, the chief of those who are bound, Haneh Kadim, in every generation due to the fact that he self-sacrificed himself at Akedah. And he was willing to sanctify the name of HaKadosh Baruch Hu at that moment, without any reservations, without any excuses, without no cost. I'm just doing it. And in doing so, he taught the trait to others. He passed it on. Torat Chesed. This trait became ingrained in the nature of the people of Am Yisrael to sacrifice their lives, Kedushat Hashem. So we all know the story. We all know the story of Rabbi Akiva. But let's remind our listeners of the story of Rabbi Akiva. Gemara Masechet Brachot, Daf Samech Aleph Amud Bet, concerning Rabbi Akiva's willingness to sacrifice his life for the sake of Kedushat Hashem. Tam Rabbanan Pam Ahat, Gazra Malchut Harasha'a Shelo Yasku Yisrael BaTorah. Once a time where the evil nation, regime, that's Rome, decreed that the Jewish people should not engage in Torah. Rabbi Akiva said, yeah, that's not happening under my watch. I'm going to teach. I got to pass. It's Torah Chesed. I got to teach. Amru, they said, Lo hayu yamim mu'atim asher tzafsuhu leRabbi Akiva v'chavshu bet asurim. Yeah, okay. Eventually they caught him into the jail. Bet asohar. B'sha'ah she'otziu et Rabbi Akiva lehariga zman kriyat shema haya. And when they took him out to kill him, it was a time of kriyat shema v'ayu sorkim et besaro. And they would comb his flesh b'masrekot shel barzel, with iron combs. V'aya mekabel alav ol malchut shamayim. And Rabbi Akiva would accept the yoke of heaven. At that moment, Amru lo talmidav, his students told him, Rabbeinu ad kan, even to this extent, at this moment you're getting killed, and you're still saying Shema Yisrael? There's a lot of mefarshim on that question. Ad kan? Amar lahem, he said to them, Kol yamai, famous line, Kol yamai ha'iti mitzayir al pasuk ze bechol nafshecha. My whole life, I was thinking of this pasuk, bechol ve'afta et Hashem Elohecha bechol nafshecha, with all your soul. Meaning, even when they're taking your soul. Amarti, and I said to myself, when is it going to come leyadi to me so that I can fulfill that? And now that it's here, now that I have the opportunity to sacrifice myself, I'm not going to fulfill the mitzvah. So he would lengthen the word echad in the first pasuk, and his neshama left him. Praiseworthy to Rabbi Akiva that his neshama left him with the word echad. So what does it mean? Unbelievable. Look at the connection now. Can you see the connection? Rabbi Akiva says, all my life I'm troubled by this pasuk, bechol nafshecha. When am I going to be able to fulfill this? Based on the Rabbeinu B'chaye, on that pasuk of Ve'afta et Hashem Elohecha b'chol levav b'chol nafshecha b'chol me'odecha, says Rabbi B'chaye the following: Keneged Avraham, Yitzchak v'Yaakov. Those three Ve'aftas b'chol levavecha b'chol nafshecha b'chol me'odecha is Avraham, Yitzchak, v'Yaakov. B'chol levavecha, with all your hearts, is Avraham. She'ahav HaKadosh Baruch Hu b'chol levavo. He loved God with all of his heart. Ve'imshich levavot le'emunato, and he brought other people to love him through his faith. B'chol nafshecha. That is Keneged Yitzchak, shemasar nafsho al gabei mizbeach, because he was willing to die for the sake of God. So b'chol nafshecha, your soul, and of course b'chol me'odecha, with all your possessions. Keneged Yaakov, sheifrish ma'aseh b'chol mamono ba'afilu mibanav, that Yaakov separated, he tithed, he took 10% for the Zerah Kadosh Baruch Hu. So we see that the command to love Hashem with all your soul corresponds to Yitzchak Avinu, who offered up his life during the Akedah, and that act paved the way for the rest of Klal Yisrael, the generations, to have power and dedication to sacrifice your own lives. And it was for that exact reason that Rabbi Akiva expressed that desire at that moment where he was dying to fulfill the pasuk, the command of Ve'afta et Hashem Elohecha b'chol nafshecha, with all your soul that has troubled him through all of his life. He wanted to emulate who? He wanted to emulate his forefather. He wanted to emulate Yitzchak Avinu, sacrifice his own life al Kiddush Hashem. Unbelievable. So now we know why Yitzchak adored the voice of Rabbi Akiva coming out of Esav's mouth. More so than the voices of Rabbi Meir or the voice of Shemaya Naftalion. Rabbi Akiva, who performed the ultimate sacrifice, demonstrated to Yitzchak definitively that his selfless act at the time of the Akedah is what gave Rabbi Akiva that power to sacrifice his own life for Kiddush Hashem. Woo! Wonderful, amazing. Let's go on one more. Let's do another one. Let's look at it from a different angle here. So we kind of, in a way, solved the Rabbi Akiva puzzle. Vayehav Yitzchak et Esav ki tzayid befiv. Yitzchak loved Esav, for there was trapping in his mouth. There is and we said that Yitzchak perceived the voice of Rabbi Akiva coming from Esav's mouth. This can also be learned from a very famous machloket between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. Here's Rabbi Meir. Regarding an interpretation in Pasuk. The Pasuk says, Banim atem la'Hashem Elokechem. I think it's Parashat Re'eh, I believe, yeah? Parashat Re'eh. You are children to Hashem, your God. The Gemara says, Bizman she'atem, this is in the name of Rabbi Yehuda, Bizman she'atem noagim minhag banim, atem keruim banim. When you behave like children, God considers you your children. En atem noagim minhag banim, en atem keruim banim. Rabbi Yehuda says, when you behave like good children, God considers you your children. When you don't behave like good children, you are not considered God's children. Rabbi Meir says, Ben kach u ben kach, atem keruim banim. No. You're always God's children. Makes no difference. Shneimar, and he quotes a whole bunch of Pesukim, Yirmiyah, they are foolish children, so even when they're fools they're called children. Children in whom there is no loyalty, so even when they're not loyal they're referred to as children. And he quotes a few Pesukim. So now, who's right? Rabbi Yehuda or Rabbi Meir? When Jews sin, are they considered God's children or they're not? It's a very big question here. Am I considered the son of God even though I'm a Rasha? Yes or no? If Rabbi Yehuda is right, then no, I'm not. And if Rabbi Meir is right, well, at least I got something to hope for. So now, there's a rule, the fundamental principle brought down the Gemara Neruvin. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, halacha ke Rabbi Yehuda. Whenever Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda argue, halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda. It's generally the rule. Now, we learned that Rabbi Meir Balanes was so holy that we know he's right, but we just can't figure it out. But then the halacha is like Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. So, according to this principle, it seems that we're only considered God's children when we are behaving properly. And if we're not behaving properly, then chas v'shalom, God, okay, you know what, sit in the corner and I don't know, we'll see if you do teshuvah. Yet, that's not what Chachamim say. Chachamim say, this is an exception. Yes, Rabbi Yehuda is right 99% of the time. But in this case, Rabbi Meir is right. That under all circumstances, we're referred to as God's children because it's self-evident from the Pesukim. From all these Pesukim that we see, where the children are called as fools, as unloyal, disloyal, and all these things, nevertheless, they're still called children. Now, who did Rabbi Akiva hold like? Rabbi Akiva was a teacher of Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda Bar Ilai, right? Rabbi Akiva lost 24,000 students during the time of Sfirat HaOmer, and he had to find new students, otherwise the Torah would have disappeared. And he found these five: Rabbi Yosef, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Elazar, all these, and Rabbi Yehuda. So who does Rabbi Akiva hold like? So I direct you to yet another story. A story with Rabbi Akiva and the wicked Turnus Rufus. The story goes, we won't read it inside because it's long. The story goes where Turnus Rufus is trying to push the buttons of Rabbi Akiva, trying to challenge him on HaKadosh Baruch Hu and why we even believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And this was the question that he poses. He says, if your God loves poor people, so why doesn't he provide for them? God loves everybody, and you have poor people who struggle financially, who struggle with food, who struggle with everything. Why doesn't God provide for them if he's just a great God? So Rabbi Akiva gives a classic answer. Basically, he wants us to give tzedakah. By us giving him tzedakah, we are saved from the judgment of Gehinnom. This is our opportunity to give them tzedakah, and this is how we're saved. Turnus Rufus looks at Rabbi Akiva and goes, what do you think, I'm an idiot? You're going to bring that upon me? The opposite. The contrary. This is what brings you to Gehinnom. Rabbi Akiva is looking, scratching his head, going down, goes, well, I'm going to give you an analogy, Turnus Rufus says. If there was a king who was angry with his servant, and he confined him to a prison. You made me upset, you're going to jail for 30 days. Okay, or a week. And then you're going to get no food, and you're going to get no drink. You're going to suffer in this room. Darkness, isolation, no food, no nothing. And then one man comes in behind the king's back and gives him food and drink. When the king hears of this, don't you think that he's going to be upset at the man? And you are called servants. You are called avadayim, the servants. So how can you do such a thing? You're going against your king. Good answer. Good response, if you ask me. Rabbi Akiva outwitted Turnus Rufus. Rabbi Akiva goes to Turnus Rufus and he says, I'm going to give you an analogy now. He says, if a human king was angry at his son and confined him to a prison, compared to his son was angry at a prison, and he ordered him not to give him food or drink for whatever amount of time, and then one man went behind the king's back to give the king's son some food or drink. When the king hears of this, won't he give the man a reward? You're taking care of my son, that you care for my son. He said to Turnus Rufus, we are called sons. We are not called servants. We are called sons. Banim atem la'Hashem Elokechem. So Turnus Rufus says, okay, that's a good one. So he goes to Rabbi Akiva, he says, I see, you are called sons and you are called servants. And Turnus Rufus says, when you act according to the will of God, then you're called sons. And when you don't act according to the will of God, then you are called servants. But now you're in Galut. Now you don't have a Bet HaMikdash. So you're not acting in accordance with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's not permissible for you to give tzedakah, because now you're like the slave that was put into the jail, and you're going against the king. So how you give tzedakah to the poor guy? So Rabbi Akiva answered him based on the pasuk, the pasuk in Yeshayahu that says here, Halo parus lara'av lachmecha, parus lara'av lachmecha va'aniyim merudim tavi bait, which means you will break your bread for the hungry, and wailing poor you will bring to the house. Rabbi Akiva says, Ematai aniyim merudim tavi bait, when does wailing poor you will bring to the house? Ha'idna, now in Galut, when we're not doing the will of God, and yet the pasuk still says you will break bread for the hungry. So even when we're Galut, we're still obligated to give tzedakah. So this pasuk teaches me that even when we're not fulfilling the will of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's still imperative to help the needy, because we're still considered children in the eyes of Rabbi Akiva, and therefore Rabbi Akiva holds like Rabbi Meir here, the other way around. Rabbi Meir was a student, but we know that Rabbi Akiva held like that, like what Rabbi Meir said, that we are considered children even when we go against the will of God. So how can there be small questions? How can Rabbi Yehuda go against what his rabbi said? Right? If Rabbi Akiva holds that we're always considered children, how can Rabbi Yehuda say no? Can I answer that the argument between Rabbi Akiva and between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir took place before Rabbi Akiva was their mentor and teacher, like when Rabbi Akiva had the other students. So now everything's starting to fit together a little bit over here, as we're going to see. Rabbi Akiva also says in Mishnah and Pirkei Avot. It's a Mishnah and Pirkei Avot says Rabbi Akiva Omer Chavivin Yisrael shenikreu banim lamakom. Beloved are the Jews, are Israel, since they are called children of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Chiba yetera nodat lahem. Greater is that love, shenikreu banim lamakom, in that it was made known to them that they are called the children of Hashem. Shneimar banim atem l'Hashem elokechem. Why the double language? Mefarshim ask. You already told me Chavivin Israel, so why chiba yetera? So Chachamim tell us, Chavivin Israel is reflecting the viewpoint of Rabbi Akiva. Chavivin Israel shenikreu lamakom refers when they act according to God's will. And chiba yetera, a greater is even when they don't act in God's will, HaKadosh Baruch Hu still loves his children. They're still endeared to God, the Jewish people. So let's go back to Yitzhak and the Arizal's comment. Vayehav Yitzhak et Esav ki tzayid befiv. Yitzhak loved Esav because trapping was in his mouth. That was referring to the neshamot of Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir that were contained inside the head of Esav. Recall that we said in the name of the Maor Enaim that Yitzhak loved Esav because he heard the voices of the Tanaim bursting from his mouth, bursting from the throat, and particularly the voice of Rabbi Akiva. So what can we say? What exactly was Yitzhak hearing? What voice? What was Rabbi Akiva saying? What was coming out of the mouth of Esav? He sensed that he was hearing Rabbi Akiva's ruling, that the halacha follows like Rabbi Meir, who also was inside Esav's head, that the halacha says that we're always called God's children. We're always banim atem l'Hashem elokechem, even when we sway from the path, even when we're in galut, even when you're the worst, you're in the mud, you're in the dirt, you're filthy, you're contaminated with tum'ah. Because since Bnei Israel are considered God's children, even when we act in opposition to HaKadosh Baruch Hu's ratzon, and what does that imply? That even Esav is God's child. That's the chidush. That's the significance of the pasuk. Vayehav Yitzhak et Esav. Yitzhak loved Esav even though he didn't act according to God's will. Why? Kitzayid befiv. Because it was trapping in his mouth. Because he heard Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Meir and their determination to believe and to teach that Bnei Israel are considered children of God, whether or not they abide by God's will. And that's even insinuated by Rashi, that Esav knew how to ensnare and deceive his father with his mouth by asking him, Abba, how do you tithe salt? How do you tithe straw? Yes, we know Esav was deceiving his father. Yitzhak, however, he perceived the voice of Rabbi Akiva, ruling like Rabbi Meir, and that prompted to ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Abba, looking up, now I'm going to ask you, God, Abba, how do you tithe straw? How do you tithe salt? In other words, how do you draw Jews closer to you, to the Almighty? How do you bring close those neshamot that are so far away, that are so lowly, that they resemble salt, that they resemble straw? They are so far from Kedusha that they don't even require tithing. The separation of Ma'aseh. Salt doesn't require tithing because it's inanimate. Straw doesn't require tithing because it's not actual food. Yet, they are still considered God's children. And we have to draw them closer to God. So how do we do it? Therefore, Yitzhak loved Esav. I'm going to love my son. Yeah, he's not a good kid. He goes out, I don't know what he does. Avodah zarah, murders, kills. It's really, really bad. But he's my son because he's God's child. And I'm going to love him in order to draw him closer. And that's why he wanted to give him the berachot. And that's why he felt maybe he can change. But truth was, Esav was not one of God's children. Ki be Yitzchak yikare lecha zara. Through Yitzchak, God told Abraham, through Yitzchak, Yikare lecha zara. Expounding on Pasuk, why does it keep Be Yitzchak? Be Yitzchak means only part of Yitzchak, velo kol Yitzchak. Not all of Yitzchak. Sure, it said, kol Yitzchak Yikare. If it would have said kol Yitzchak, then it would have meant Yaakov and Esav. But Be Yitzchak means just Yaakov. So, yes, you are a living creature, Esav, but you're not one of God's children. You're not one of us. You're not a Yisrael. You're not Banim Atem L'Hashem Elokechem. And that's where he realized he couldn't do it. So what happens? He gives a brachot to Yaakov instead. He proceeds to reveal the amazing brachot. What did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do? He orchestrated one of the most deceiving, cunning modes by anybody ever done. What Rivka does in this week's parasha, everybody goes to town. Gets him dressed, the Esav's clothing, the sand, everything, just so that he can get that berachot. This was all orchestrated by God. Orchestrated for Yitzchak to hear Rabbi Akiva's voice from Esav's throat prior. He needed to hear that because he heard Rabbi Akiva hold like Rabbi Meir, that we are all considered God's children no matter how to behave, even though this doesn't apply to Esav HaRasha like we explained. But look at what the Sefer Yishmach Yisrael says. He says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu worked it out that Yaakov Avinu received the berachot from Yitzchak. How did he receive the berachot? While dressed in Esav's clothing. Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, what? So that the descendants of Yaakov, the children of Israel, would be entitled to those berachot even when their external behavior resembles that of Esav. Even when you're acting like Esav, and you're so far away from the source, you're so far away from the nucleus, from the energy, you're literally wearing his clothing, you look and feel like him, you're still going to get the berachot. Unbelievable. And now we know that Abraham Avinu served HaKadosh Baruch Hu with the midah of chesed. Yitzchak served Hashem with the midah of din. Pachad Yitzchak, as we say. So what should have happened? What should have happened when Yitzchak heard that Yaakov took the blessings from him, disguised as Esav? He had the ability to impose din right then and there. He could have just said, who knows, one of Yitzchak's bang, and that would be the end of it. And declare that Israel was not worthy of receiving those berachot. And in fact, Yaakov was worried about this. When his mom, Rivka, went up to him and told him about the plan that she devised, what did he say? Maybe my father's going to touch me, and I'm going to be considered like a mocker in his eye. Whoa, if Yitzchak curses me, if that will happen, I'm done, I'm finished, I don't stand a chance. I'm dressing like Esav to extend a beracha that he wants to give to somebody else, he's going to curse me. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu, berov rahama v'hasadav, in all of his mercy and kindness, arranged for Yitzchak to love Esav, even though he was evil. It was all part of the plan. Kitzayid befiv, because he perceived the voice of Rabbi Akiva trapped inside Esav's head, the same voice who ruled according to Rabbi Akiva, that even when Bnei Israel don't act in accordance with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they are still called his children. And for that reason, that's why he wanted to give the berachot, as he wanted to give the berachot to Esav. Yet when Yitzchak realized that HaKadosh Baruch Hu arranged all of this, Yaakov disguised as Esav so that he can receive the berachot, he understood. Yitzchak realized it's only to Rabbi Akiva's descendants. It's only to Yaakov's descendants, which is Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva's ruling of Banim Atem Hashem Ukechem is only for the children of Yaakov, Bnei Israel. They're the ones who are deserving the beracha, even when they resemble Esav externally, even when they're failing, even when they're falling, even when they're sinning. Chas v'shalom. Because deep down inside, way inside their neshama, beneath the facade, beneath the fakeness, beneath all the falsehood that they live with, in truth, they resemble Yaakov Avinu. Kam baruch tiyeh. And that's how we interpret this week's parasha. Wishing everybody a wonderful night.